Do you want to learn how to scale a remote company from 5 people or under to more than hundreds of people? This is exactly what I did, and this video is going to teach you everything I learned from building a fully remote company, one of the fastest growing companies in the United States, and everything I learned about scaling this remote team from 5 people to where it's at for hundreds of people. Now, this is an 8-figure company, something that's US based, and had a combination of US employees, international employees, and everything in between. I'm gonna talk about the 3 main tips that I learned for scaling a remote company and what you can use to implement, whether you're looking to go from 5 employees to 10 or 15, and everything in between. Today's gonna be the video about the top 3 scaling tips for building a remote company with a strong infrastructure, culture, and something that's going to make money as you scale and grow. So let's go ahead and dig into number 1. So starting off with number 1, probably the most important thing with building a fully remote team is company culture. Now, why does company culture matter? When you have things like profit, scaling systems, everything like that, company culture matters because if you don't hire the right people, if you don't build the right culture, you're gonna have a weak foundation to build off of, and there's gonna be a misalignment in the employees. The back of your company is not gonna see the vision of the company, is not gonna help your scaling techniques grow and implement all the things that matter, like building systems, using the right software. All that stuff's gonna be negated if you don't have the right company culture and if you don't have the right team. So starting off with your first few hires, this is gonna be something that's detrimental. So your first group of people you get on board are essentially going to make or break your scaling. This is gonna be something that you need to spend a lot of time on your first initial hires. And the saying couldn't be more true: hire slowly and fire fast. If somebody's not gonna fit your company culture, your vision, then you need to fire them because they're not gonna be a good fit for your long-term growth, and they're gonna be a hindrance in actually growing and scaling your team. But a lot of this is going to start at the first stage. Before you get to any of this, you need to think about what is your long-term vision for your company, and 2, what type of company culture do you want to build? Do you want to build something that's going to be suit and ties when you're doing Zoom meetings? Or are you going to be okay with people showing up to their one-on-one meetings with their bosses in their pajamas? You need to dictate this, and you need to make sure that company culture is clearly defined from day 1. So how do you actually make company culture better? 1, after you've already defined a clear definition of the culture and the vision that you want to build, is some of the best ways are doing non-work activities, whether that's in person or remotely. I love the idea of getting people in your company in different departments to have virtual coffees. Maybe you're doing groups of stuff where they're doing games, or non-work activities where these calls are virtual, but only 10 to 15% of it should be work related. The other part should be focused on something else. The other essential thing that I've seen, you can't replace the in-person meetings. You have to have at least once a year an in-person meeting where the whole team, or at least the upper level management, is meeting together on site and you're doing activities. And this balance should be 50% work stuff, 50% on-site fun activities where you're just getting to know each other a little bit better. The reason this is so important is because you're gonna feel more comfortable with each other in the work environment, and it's going to make that communication process when you're on different sides of the world a lot more streamlined. So it's going to also help reinforce that vision. It's going to reinforce that company culture that you want to build. I personally recommend people doing remote retreats at least once a quarter, so that way everyone is meeting together in person, and this is going to help build a much more sustainable and strong remote company culture. So internal communication and internal marketing is one of the most important things that you need to have structured and implemented before you start scaling your remote team. Just think about this. If you're trying to communicate with 5 people, to go to 10 people, it's not gonna be just a 50% increase. The communication lines are actually gonna be around 3 or 4 times more difficult just because there's more people in line. Now, when you go from 10 people to 100, if you don't have streamlined communication processes in internal marketing, it's going to become extremely more difficult to get communication and to just let everyone know what exactly is going on. Now, a common example of this, especially with a remote team, is different time zones. Now, a lot of times when I was helping build this remote company, we would have meetings where there's people on 3 or 4 different time zones. And this alone would make the work process a lot more difficult. So If you're going to build a worldwide remote company, you really need to have a streamlined process for communication, whether that's with your team by using Slack, which is going to cut down on slow response times versus email, utilizing tools like Loom, where instead of getting on a phone call, you can just record a short video asking a question and send it over to the individual. That way they can reply to you right away without having to have all this back and forth with call bookings. The third thing is having internal meetings. I hate the back and forth you have to go through with trying to set up a call, because at the end of the day, sometimes you're going to have some one-on-one meetings, but a lot of times this can be very frustrating, and a lot of times the easiest way is to just book a call through a company call link utilizing Calendly or HubSpot calls or any of these platforms where you can go in with a little click, see the availability for other people on your team, and just go ahead and schedule a call. So I love that process for internal communication, but what about internal marketing? Essentially, marketing is telling what the company is going on, promoting all the cool features, all the cool new events, because if you send out an email, even though it's going to be an internal urgent marked email, only a small percentage of people are actually going to fully read and understand that email. Maybe it's 70%, but with 100 people, that's going to be 70 people and 30 people who aren't having any idea of what's actually going on. Maybe a better idea is to send weekly recurring emails and have a weekly update call, promoting this in different areas, having a checklist of people who actually watch the full video. That way you know that at least everyone knows what's going on inside the company. So you need to really think about this. Anytime you send a message, you got to understand that a small percentage of people aren't going to thoroughly read that. Now, maybe those are the people that you need to cut from your team, or maybe you need to implement a system where it's going to be a little bit easier for them to understand what's going on. So another important thing for building a remote company is setting clear expectations and KPIs. Now, what is a KPI? A KPI is a key performance indicator, and these could be things like if an email is sent from a customer, you need to be replying to them within 24 hours. Maybe for internal communication, any Slack messages should be responded to within 4 hours if they're sent during the working hours of your company. So you need to outline and clearly set all these expectations from day one before you start scaling your remote team. And the reason is if these are not clear, then people are going to have a different approach to communication. One individual on your team might think it's acceptable to respond to emails within 2 to 3 days, while another person might think it's acceptable to send a reply within 4 to 5 days. So if you don't have a clear expectation of what's required and you don't have any system to monitor this, then it's going to be really difficult to really scale, because everything is going to need that strong foundation to build off of. So have all these clear expectations and guidelines clearly documented, and have a process for if people aren't meeting these. For example, sometimes people aren't going to show up to meetings that are important and that they should be at. There should be some sort of consequence process for this. Maybe the first one is a warning, the second one has some sort of official consequences, and then the third one they're potentially getting fired, or there's some other process that they need to go through retraining, and why it's so important to show up to meetings on time and ahead of schedule. So you need to make sure that you have all of these KPIs and expectations from day one, because if you don't have it set from day one, things are going to get really messy. So the third and final thing with building and scaling a remote team is profit sharing, or figuring out a financial incentive to keep people motivated. So profit sharing is essentially paying somebody a base salary. Let's say 50% is coming from a base salary, and then 50% of their profit or their income is coming from some type of profit sharing. So if the company is doing very well, you can set certain metrics that everything above that, they're getting a percentage of that. So that way the company is very invested in fully growing, because their salary is going to be tied to the company growth. Now, I think this structure works very well for these kind of low to mid-sized companies, meaning 20 to 50 people. After that, it becomes a little bit hard to have such a huge impact where you can actually impact your profit sharing amount. Now, at a company of thousands of people, it's going to be much harder for an individual employee to feel like they have an impact on the company's growth, where a smaller company is going to have a much bigger impact per employee. So I think this structure works very well in the 50 employees and below, but above that it can become a little bit complicated. So profit sharing could be a great way to align that stick and carrot to make sure that your team is growing at the same growth rate of the company. So some of the upsides of profit sharing is, one, it's going to really align that motivation. As the company grows, it's going to incentivize people to continue growing, to continue putting in more work and effort, because their direct payment is tied to that profit share. And essentially this is going to really align the incentives for the entire company to continue growing and making the company as profitable as possible. So some of the downsides to profit sharing is not every quarter or every year is going to be a growth year. I've seen some years where there's downturn, and this is going to result in massive churn. So let's imagine a scenario where the company doesn't hit their profit sharing quotas and they're only getting that base salary. In this example alone, a lot of times people aren't going to stick around because they can leave to other companies that are going to pay them a much higher salary than what they're getting at their base salary. So a lot of times profit sharing works when there's growth years and growth quarters, but a lot of times it can backfire when you don't have a system set up for these down months or downward trends. So if they're not getting a good base salary, you have to be prepared for potentially these individuals not sticking around in those tough times. So you can potentially expect to lose some of your best employees because they're not going to stick around for a low paycheck. In conclusion, it's extremely important to build these 3 foundations, because that's going to give you a much sturdy foundation to build and scale a remote team past 100 people, past 1,000 people. If you really want to learn more about scaling remote teams, leave a comment below. Maybe you utilize some software or systems which are extremely important to growing a remote team. Let me know what some of your favorite software or tricks are for growing your own personal team. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm putting out new videos pretty much every day. And make sure you tap that bell notification icon to learn when new videos are being posted and published. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.